Alrighty, welcome to Rorate Caeli. This is a live stream Q&A. For those of you in the chat, just let me know if you can hear me okay. We were having some audio issues earlier, so I just want to make sure we got that ironed out before we begin. While we wait for that confirmation, a bit of a channel update. We've kind of hit a bit of a hiatus in terms of content, but I'd like to start trying to do more on the YouTube side. Alright, Ossifrage and Eusebius O'Brien says they can hear me. Awesome. Well, I hope everyone's having a good evening tonight. I've got me a glass of Crown here with me tonight. I've got my tobacco pipe, and I am ready to hang out and chill. We're actually almost approaching 100 subscribers, believe it or not, so we might have to do another stream when we hit 100. We'll see if anybody has any ideas of what they'd like to see for the 100 subscriber special. That's something we could talk about tonight as well. I also might shoot a message to Father Deacon Joseph Swaden later and see if he wants to join me, if that would be something. I don't know yet. That's just something I've thought about. If anybody has any other ideas of what they'd like to see, maybe you don't have any questions, but maybe some ideas in terms of future videos, future content, things like that. We were trying with StreamYards to get it to work with our channel, but for some reason, based on our technology that we have on hand, we couldn't get it to work. We found a new software called Melon, and that's what we're using today. So I hope everything sounds good, looks good, and if so, we will go ahead and stick with this program. But yeah, so far it's been a pretty interesting time for us at Rorate Caeli. We had a Western Rite conference that one of our members attended, that I attended, and that was in October, the second week in October. So that was big news. I have a lot of pictures from that we'll be putting together and compiling to make a video on the channel here. Alright, we have our first question. Eusebius O'Brien asks, what do you think about the current socio-economic and political climate of America? Maybe an in-depth... okay, so Eusebius... The current socio-economic and political climate, I think that it's kind of tense. We're kind of on the precipice in terms of American politics. We kind of see there are two very different visions for America, and I don't know if they're compatible. So I think we're just kind of on the edge of history right now. Okay, hope that answers your question. Ossifrage asks, maybe an in-depth analysis of Celtic Christianity. Maybe I could make a slide or something I've been thinking about. That. Oh yeah, that could be interesting, Celtic Christianity. My personal take on that is there's a lot of myth and legend behind Celtic Christianity. So I think a stream like diverse other monks did recently, where they kind of set the facts straight on a lot of things, I think that could be very helpful. Yeah, let's continue talking about that, though. What would you like to see done about Celtic Christianity? You know, we're a Western Rite history and apologetics channel, and the Celts were Western. So yeah, that's something that we could totally do. So yeah, just let me know what you'd like to see with that, and we can look at that. I might shoot a text here to Father Deacon and see if he's doing anything. Perhaps he might want to join us this evening. I'm not a fan of dead air, but we don't have a lot of us on tonight, so there might be a little bit of radio silence for a moment or two. Metanoia says hi. What up, Tommy? Any questions you have for me? Yeah, I wish I could play music or something in the background to kind of take up some of the dead air, but my editor informed me that would get us copyright strucken down, so we can't do that. If it were up to me, though, Alright, I just sent a message to Father Deacon, and we'll see if he responds and if he wants to join us this evening. That would be really cool if he is able. So any other questions about the Western Rite in particular? Asafraj asks, let me put that up. Or maybe the Carolinian issues with the Seventh Council. That would be a very useful tool for us in a good apologetic. I agree. So, a real quick rundown of that, though. Just kind of armchair apologetics at this point. Quite literally, I'm in an armchair with a mixed drink. So, yeah, definitely armchair apologetics. But the Carolinian issue and the Seventh Council, yes, they rejected it. But the reason why, if you check the Libri Carolini, the Carolinian books, it's because they received a mistranslation of the council, and they thought that the council had said that they were worshipping images with the same worship that was due to God. So of course they rejected that. That would have been heretical. Later on they realized that that was not the case, so they changed their position on the Seventh Council. So yeah, I think that a lot of people, a lot of scholars, or not necessarily scholars, but modern scholarship, the sub-modern scholarship, has looked at the issue of the Carolinians, and they rightly assert that they rejected the Seventh Council, but they don't necessarily explain why. So I think that apologetic kind of died in the 1800s, but more scholarship has been done, and it's been determined that they weren't iconoclasts. They weren't destroying images. We have plenty of examples of Carolinian images and art and illuminated manuscripts and statuary. So yeah, I think I could do a show on that. That's a pretty decent idea. I'll take that down. Good suggestion, Asafraj. Alright, I just responded back. Father Deacon hit me back. So, yeah, we'll see. Maybe he might join us. That could be pretty cool. Alright, yeah, any other questions? Anything, really. Western Rite, theology. Obviously, my expertise is in the Western Rite. Oh, and Blessed Feast of St. Raphael the Archangel to everybody out there on the old calendar. Western Rite. So, if I'm not mistaken, tomorrow is the feast of Saint Crispin. So that could be some Sunday homework for everybody. Check out Saint Crispin. He's a pretty cool saint. And then for us on the old calendar, it looks like this next upcoming week, through the weekend, is actually going to be the Halloween Triduum for us. So All Souls, All Saints, All Hallows Eve, not necessarily in that order, but that's coming up on the old calendar. Obviously, I'm Western Rite, so we have those feast days. I think a video might be interesting as well to look at the Halloween Triduum and kind of explain that. I know that there's some Western Rite masses available on YouTube for the various the Halloween Triduum on the new calendar from St. Patrick's in Virginia, but I think a video going through and explaining the propers of the feast and the history behind these feasts, I think that would be a good idea. Asafraj asks, or says, in general, I would like some videos on certain rites that were suppressed after Trent. Do we know if Rome has a modern Gallican rite? Yeah, I think I could do a video on maybe some Preschism liturgy. A lot of it is kind of tough because that's pretty weedy scholarship. You're going to have to know what you're talking about to discuss a lot of these rites because there's so much rumor and conjecture about it. For instance, the Stowe quote missal. You see that flown everywhere, and diverse other monks just recently published a video about the Stowe missal, and I encourage everybody to check that out. If somebody could link it out in the chat, that would be really cool too. But Yeah, I recommend that video to everybody. That's just one example of a supposed Celtic rite. But in terms of like the Ambrosian rite, I think that could be something. The Gallican rite, I don't know a whole lot about it. I know St. John Maximovich had, I think he took a look at that and he revised that rite. So yeah, let's see, we got some more questions here. Let me take a look. Eusebius O'Brien asks, how do you reconcile Rocor's apologetic with that of the apologetic of the broader Moscow Patriarchate? That's a really solid question. I don't know how to answer that right now in terms of without... Obviously, I want to be sensible to all parties involved, and there's not a clear-cut answer yet, but there does seem to be certain tendencies, I'll put it that way. There are certain tendencies in Rocor, and there are certain tendencies in Moscow Patriarchate, and these tendencies don't always align, if that makes sense. So I think, honestly, I believe that these tendencies, they may be reconciled, they may not be reconciled. We can talk whether those are theological tendencies or if they're historical tendencies and what patristic basis these tendencies have. So without getting too complex into that, I know it's kind of vague, but I'm trying to be purposefully vague because I don't know how comfortable I am with the peculiarities of my specific private opinion on this matter. I don't know if I feel comfortable publishing that online on behalf of Rorate Caeli, just in case anybody that assists the channel has a different view. Make this channel happen. So I hope that sort of sidesteps the question. Alright, Asafraj says, I read Father Felix's paper before he made the video. Oh, nice. You must be on the in circle there. Alright, Stow Missile. It's not a missile, but yes. So Father Deacon responded to us, and he said that he's out with his family this evening, but he's going to plug the channel, and yeah, maybe he'll join us some other time. That would be really, really awesome of him. I'm a big fan of a lot of his apologetic work, and he used to be Western Rite, so of course he's going to be a friend of this channel. I believe he did the Sarum liturgy, if I'm not mistaken, so maybe perhaps the Hispanic liturgy as well, given his background. I don't know, though. I haven't spoken to him about his previous liturgical usages. Oh, Asafraj says, yeah, it's not a missile. If you check out the Diverse Other Monks video, which is really good, Father Felix's paper, he kind of shows how it's conclusively not a missile, and many of the renditions that you see today of the Stow Missal are actually interpolations upon the half-baked text that comes down to us in the Stow Sacramentary, if I can enunciate words tonight. I did have another friend who might wanted to come, has expressed interest in possibly joining us tonight. I don't know if he's still interested in that, but yeah, I'm always welcome if anybody wants. Good. And asks, could you go into the Walsingham miracle statue? I sure could. Our Lady of Walsingham, I think she appeared in 1050... 53 or 56. I think it was 1056, if I'm not. Our Lady of Richeldes. Oh, Ossifrage informs me that it's lagging it. My apologies for that. Let me know if it gets any better or worse. Keep an eye on that. But yeah, Our Lady of Walsingham, 1060 or 1050 something, roundabout, maybe 1063 perhaps. 1061, okay. And she appeared to Lady Rus, who was a mild woman, and she wanted to visit the Holy Land, but she couldn't due to the Muslims that had taken over the Holy Land. Well, many English people were in that same situation, and keep in mind this is just before the Crusades, so there really wasn't a militant Christian force. Much of the Byzantine army had been pushed out, so there wasn't a lot of hope for even a well-off Christian in England to go on a pilgrimage to the Holy Land. So Lady Richeldes prayed. The Virgin Mary appeared to her, showed her the Holy House where the Virgin Mary raised Christ from Holy House in England. And it looks like but she came outside and discovered the Holy House was built miraculously by angels, and inside of the Holy House was a statue of Our Lady of Walsingham. So it's a statue almost by nature. So yeah, I hope that's sufficient to discuss Our Lady of Walsingham. I guess I should also note that it's considered an Orthodox statue because, while yes, it did happen after the date 1054, that's kind of an arbitrary static date, and I could do a whole show discussing the intricacies of 1054 versus other dates in regards to the Great Schism. For instance, the other patriarchates largely were still in communion with the English and the Western churches. Ossifrage says it's cutting out a lot now. My apologies. Let me see if I can possibly fix that on my side. It might be an issue of the headset that I am using. Let me check. While I am doing that, if anybody else has any other questions, we're about live for about 20 minutes now. If we don't have a whole lot, I might stick around for another 10 minutes. I didn't really have a whole big plan for this evening. I just really wanted to make sure that the live streaming capabilities worked for the channel. We tried a couple weeks ago to do a video on statuary with Ossifrage, but we couldn't get the technology to work, so we had to postpone. So now that we have it up and it's running, it's pretty promising. Humphrey says Jay Dyer has sent us. Welcome, Humphrey. That's pretty cool to hear. Well, yeah, if you guys have any other questions about the Western Rite or general topics, I'd be happy to answer. Jeremy Klein, what up, man? Father Deacon says, definitely, I'll try it out next time. Awesome, for sure. Ossifrage says, I may have gotten someone big to shout you out. Yeah, it looks like it. You might have. Thank you. I appreciate that. Might be your doing. Yeah, it appears so. Looks like it might have went down for a second. Let me know if it's back up. Yeah, something happened and it kind of went down for a second, but I think we're good now. Just want to confirm with the chat, make sure everything's okay. Awesome, it's back now. Great. All right, so Humphrey asks, I've heard some Western Rite parishes have left Rocor and therefore heretical. Is there any truth to this? Well, much like anything in orthodoxy, there are going to be parishes that come and go. That's either a blessing or something pretty lamentable. There's a current situation in England right now where there's canonical litigation. Some parishes of Rocor Western Rite in England did leave. There's some, like I said, the matter's in a canonical court right now, and it's actually, I think it's at the patriarchal level right now. So they are received by a canonical Orthodox archdiocese within the Russian Church. The issue is they did not get their canonical letters of change of diocese. Now, as to if it's still canonical, I don't know. I'm not a canon lawyer, but just know that they did leave Rocor, but they're still in communion with a Russian Orthodox bishop. So I hope that answers the question. But yeah, Jeremy Klein, he says, what would you recommend for people who attend Eastern churches but still want a connection to the pre-schism West? Are there devotions and prayers, or is the Western Rite mainly the liturgy? That's a really solid question, Jeremy, because a lot of people that support the Western Rite may not be able to attend a parish due to proximity or due to the fact that they're just happy and comfortable in their parish and they discovered the Eastern Rite later on, something to that effect. So that's a really solid question. I would say that, of course, for Orthodox Christians, the liturgy is what grounds us, and that's the most important prayer. So in a way, it's hard to live a Western Rite ethos and lifestyle if you're disconnected from the liturgy, but I don't think it's necessarily impossible. For instance, you could pray the Liturgy of the Hours, not the Roman Catholic book by the same name, but the traditional Western Benedictine prayer life. That's something that you can keep at home, the daily office of St. Benedict. That's something, there are various Western Rite prayer books, such as the St. Gregory Prayerbook, the St. Colman Prayerbook, the Walsingham Prayerbook. I can link some of those in chat if anybody's interested specifically in those, but yeah, there's some options to keep the prayer life at home. The Western Rite also maintains its own liturgical calendar that's distinct. So you may notice Roman Catholics celebrate some feast days on different days than the Eastern Rite Church. That's not just a Roman Catholic Orthodox difference. The Latin Church, even when it was Orthodox, celebrated feasts on different days. So for instance, today in the old calendar, Western Rite, it is the feast of St. Raphael, the Archangel. I believe in the Eastern Rite, that's a different date. So I hope that answers the question. I would say try to stay connected with the Liturgy of the Hours and good Western Rite prayer books. All right, let's check out some other questions. Buckled Crane says, hello, Muhammad, I have come. Inshallah. Humphrey says, what's the origin story for the Western Rite? That's a really good question. It's kind of a complicated one, and one that I don't know if I could get into completely during this stream, because it might take a couple hours to really sit down and get into the nooks and crannies of it. But long story short, the modern form of the Western Rite came about in the early 1800s. A man named Julian Joseph Overbeck, who was a Roman Catholic priest who became a Lutheran, and then he went to England to study under the Anglo-Catholics like Newman, Pusey, and the others. He was never Anglican, though. He just studied under them. And then he came to the conclusion that the Orthodox Church was the only correct church, and he corresponded quite frequently with a man named Vladimir Guette, who wrote the famous book, The Papacy. So Overbeck started a journal called The Orthodox West, and he decided he wanted to petitioned the Holy Synod of Russia to look into establishing Western Rite parishes in England. And he actually got about 150 Anglicans to sign on and say, yes, that's what we want to do. We'd like to establish it. It got approved by the Russian Patriarchate. It got approved by the Church of Constantinople. And unfortunately, the vision of Overbeck did not succeed. There was no national Western Rite Church established in the West, but parishes have still continued, and various jurisdictions have blessed the usage of the Western Rite. So I hope that briefly answers the question. Buckled Crane says, how did this get so big? I'm an OG with 2 other viewers. Yeah, I think someone shouted us out in Jay's server, or perhaps Jay shouted us out, but yeah, I think so. I really appreciate everybody who's sticking around and listening. Someone else, let's see who says this. American National Union, I can't see the rest of your name, says, what's the story on the French Orthodox Church? So the French Orthodox Church was established by St. John Maximovich. I don't have an exact date off the top of my head, but I know that they do a reformed version of the Gallican liturgy, and I think they went into schism with Russia after St. John left, perhaps. I know that was due to the communism and things like that. And then I think they went under the Church of Romania, and they had some canonical issues under the Church of Romania, so they kind of had an ecclesiastical divorce, so to speak. Beyond that, I don't know a whole lot about what's going on in France with that particular national church body. Technically, I think they are non-canonical, but like I said, I'm not an expert on the French side, so I'll investigate that and I'll get back to you. I might make a video about that. Buckled Crane says, Rome has a feast day for St. Peter in Antioch. Yes, that's true. And the Antiochian Western Rite Vicariate has a feast day of the Chair of St. Peter, believe it or not. And they normally, that's a Latin Rite devotion to the Church of Rome. But the Antiochians picked it up because Antioch is also the See of Peter and is the Chair of Peter. So I think that was a pretty clever situation. All right. Let's see. Looks like Jeremy says, thanks, King. Links to those books would be great. Yeah, Eusebius, if you're still in the chat, if you could link up some Western Rite prayer books in the chat, that'd be great. All right, Nizzy says, if you're going to link anything, please do so in the description for those of us who aren't here for the live stream. Of course, yeah. So what I'll do is I'll link those in the chat, and then I'll go back and put those in the description for everybody. Buckled Crane says St. Ambrose or St. Augustine. If you're referring to which saint I like better, I don't really have an answer for you. I like them both. They're great. Metanoia says not yet. Sometime in the 60s, says Ossifrage. Oh, Eusebius says that they were Serbian, and then they flipped to Romanian. Okay. Metanoia says, what do you think of Bishop Jean Nectaire? He was the bishop that St. John Maximovich consecrated to lead the French Orthodox Church. I think highly of him. I don't know if he necessarily died in communion with the Canonical Church, but if he did, I greatly respect him. I think that he was a very interesting character, and like I said, I don't know a whole lot about the French side of Western Rite. I typically study the Roman Rite and the Anglican situation. The Anglicans that decided to become Orthodox, I should phrase it that way. Let's see. Romania only has one Western Rite parish in France now, says... Who says that? That's Eusebius. I don't know if they only have one. I'm pretty sure they have a few more, but I could be wrong. Let's see. Okay, so Ossifrage has an answer for us here. He says, there were some liturgical reform issues that the Orthodox Church of France did not accept, which caused the issues. Okay, so they might have... wanted to either Byzantinize or Latinize, something like that had happened, and I'm sure they didn't accept it. So, okay, so thank you, Ossifrage, for that explanation. Eusebius is going to put the prayer books in the description of this video if you're interested. Okay, let's see, we got another question. Man, keep them rolling, guys. How about a positive question? What is the benefit to evangelizing with the Western Rite in the West? Okay, that's an interesting question. I think that the positive advantage of using the Western Rite in the West is that the life of the Western saints, the ethos of the Western saints, in some way can live on. And I think that that's pretty important. For instance, as I read some of the commentaries, like, for instance, the Catechism of St. Cyril, there's clear antecedents to this in the Byzantine tradition. But when you read, for instance, St. Ambrose of Milan on the Mysteries, which is a really great book, I recommend it, he references certain things from the Roman customs. Now, while yes, both of them are apostolic traditions, I think that there's a value in me reading St. Ambrose on the Mysteries and thinking back, like, I remember doing these things when I was baptized or chrismated or whatever, what have you. And the same richness is also found in the Eastern tradition when Eastern Rite folks read the Catechism of St. Cyril, and he talks about the initiation in the Eastern tradition. So I think it's important to us, and it adds a level of richness and identification with the Western saints by restoring this tradition. So I hope that answers the question. Buckled Crane asks, thoughts on Gallicanism in France post-Trent? So I assume you're talking about the Gallicanism post-Trent leading up to the Vatican Council. I think favorably on it. I think that they could have possibly... They were very close to becoming Orthodox. If you look at the Bonn Reunion Conference, BONN, that's something you guys can check into. I think very highly of them, and I wish that they would have become Orthodox, be it through historical circumstance or theological. Eusebius says he's only seen one parish listed. Metanoia says, what do you say for those who claim that the Western Rite should be a transition between Western converts to the Church and then to Eastern Rite? Well, on a pragmatic level, that may be how it works, because unfortunately while there are a good amount of Western Rite churches, and the number grows every year, it's very aggressive in terms of its missionary approach. But if you were to move, which unfortunately I may be moving soon, and I might be missing out of my church, I don't know yet, but it is unfortunate, but it's also not unfortunate, because you get to experience the richness of the Byzantine tradition as well, and both traditions are equal and valid and wonderful and avail to salvation. But to answer your question more directly, for those who say it should be a transition, I don't know if I can agree with that. I don't think that it should be. I think that it's a valid apostolic expression of the faith, and a convert who spends their entire life from cradle to grave in the Western Rite Church has every tool that they need at their disposal for salvation and sanctification. And the same thing goes for an Eastern Rite church as well. So I don't think it should be. I mean, it can be, but I don't know if I would go as far as to say it should be. Humphrey says, is the music in Western Rite liturgy a cappella? So this gets into some of the differences between some of the jurisdictions and what they prefer. Antiochian Western Rite, they do permit the use of organs in the liturgical services, whereas Rocor Western Rite does not, to my knowledge, permit that, generally. So for Rocor Western Rite, which is what my parish is, so that's what I have the most personal experience with, the answer would be yes, it is a cappella. Dixie Pride, he says, why revive the Western liturgy when we could just use the Eastern tradition? Wouldn't it be a lot easier? So this question sounds pretty nice, but it's based on a premise that I don't necessarily agree with. And the premise is we should do what's easy. And I don't necessarily think that that's always the most orthodox ethos. It would be easier to do 1 prostration instead of 10. It would be easier to just attend Sunday Mass or Sunday Divine Liturgy without Saturday Vespers. So we as Orthodox don't necessarily just look at things based on how easy they are. That seems to be sort of an American mindset, and I'm not judging America by any means, but just like generally, it seems more of an American mindset. And it also kind of falls back into the idea of reductionism. Do we reduce the church? Do we just because one thing works doesn't necessarily mean that's all that it has to be? For instance, in the Byzantine tradition, there are 8 tones. Well, you can sing all of the music using 1 tone. So why do we need to have 8? Well, it adds to the richness of the church. So I hope that answers the question. Eusebius says all of the books should be in the description. If you refresh and come back, they'll be there. All right, thank you very much for that. Dixie Pride says, I guess the right word would be practical. Okay, practical. Let me look at that again. Wouldn't it be a lot more practical? It could be, but the way I see it is this. If restoring the Western Rite to the church could save just one more soul in the grand economy of salvation, then that's good enough for me, and that's worth the entire lifetime of many people, because the entire mission, the missiology of the church is to save souls, is it not? So while it may not seem prudent for us today, for some people today, the church has decided that this is a missiological move that it should make, and it is making that move, and it has made that move. So I hope that answers the question. If you're not American, then where are you from? I am American. So Humphrey says, since coming to be in the 1800s, what is the justification for Western Rite being a part of Orthodoxy? So it didn't come to be in the 1800s. I may have misspoke. Forgive me if I did, but that's not necessarily accurate. One moment, I'm going to pour myself another drink here. I apologize for the break, but I know a lot of you guys came from Jay Dyer's streams, and no, I don't have a big, massive jug of water like Jay has. Unfortunately, we might get one of those soon, though. That would be funny. Alright, so it's coming... Okay, I read the question already. It didn't come about in the 1800s. That's when Julian Joseph Overbeck petitioned the Synod of Russia and the Synod of Constantinople. Before then, Western Orthodoxy had existed for 1,000 years, over 1,000 years, and various parishes in Poland, for instance, they came into the fold, and I think they left with the Uniates, so that was like the 1400s. Mount Athos maintained a Western Rite Benedictine monastery up until the 1300s as well. So it's only been about 500 years without a Western Rite presence. So I would argue, what justification is there for it to not be a part of Orthodoxy, since that's the normative plan of action for Orthodoxy for the most of its history. Okay, Asafraj says, can you talk about the cradle to convert ratio in Western Rite churches, and how great the evangelization and conversion is in the Western Rite? Sure. So there is going to be, well, any Orthodox church nowadays typically has a lot of converts in it, unless it's a very ethnic parish. That's just due to the rapid nature of expansion in Orthodoxy. We have great apologists like Jay and like others. So they're doing good work, and it's expanding the Orthodox Church and spreading the faith. So of course there's going to be many converts. Specifically in the Western Rite, the vast majority of people are going to be converts. And the reason for that is not because these churches don't necessarily bear good fruit, but because it's exploding so much. We're constantly establishing missions and things like that. So it is growing very, very fast, very rapidly. I had the great privilege of attending the Rorate Western Rite conference a month ago, and I got to see several ordinations happen for the Western Rite. So it's definitely growing, and it has no plans on slowing down. So there's going to be more converts just by nature of the fact that it's very missionary right now. Asafraj asks, could you talk about the amount of modern saints which have blessed the Western Rite, spelled incorrectly? Sure. So, obviously St. John, everybody knows he blessed and supported it. St. Tikhon blessed and supported it. St. Raphael of Brooklyn blessed and supported it. St. Nicholas of Japan was a big advocate for it as well. Jean Nectaire, he was a Western Rite bishop. He obviously supported it. He was consecrated by St. John. Various other Russian Orthodox bishops in Western Europe from the diaspora of the Soviet Union, they also supported it. So there's a good amount of holy people that did support it. Okay, yeah, on the same topic, are there any saints that partook of it? Yes, so St. John, of course, there's famous photos of him celebrating it. Let's see, modern saints that have blessed it. Yeah, so I know St. Tikhon up at Nashotah House in England also attended Western Rite services when he was in America. As for Nicholas, or St. Raphael of Brooklyn did as well. I'm trying to recall if any other ones that I know of have. Vladimir Losky, if you guys are familiar with him, and if you're coming from Jay's crowd, you probably are familiar with Vladimir Losky. Vladimir Losky was a huge advocate for the Western Rite. He wrote famously the Mystical Theology of the Eastern Church. He actually attended these churches when he was in France. Let's see. Humphrey says, what drew you to the Western Rite? That's a solid question. Personally, I had a Lutheran background, so I did my entire catechesis, a year-long catechesis, in an Eastern Rite parish. I didn't even know the Western Rite existed. I discovered it existed and had a blessing from the priest to pursue it. And so I did. Finished out my catechesis in the Western Rite parish and was received in the Western form. What drew it to me was I went through the entire liturgical cycle of the Eastern Rite, and it was an absolutely gorgeous tradition, just gorgeous. And I got to Christmas, and it sort of seemed kind of glum to me. I'm a big Christmas guy, and that's just kind of how I was raised and how my household operated as a kid. So it seemed kind of depressing in many ways. And I finally made it to a Western Rite parish for Old Calendar Christmas. And oh my goodness, it was everything that I had recalled from my childhood, the hymns, everything. So that's kind of a cheap answer, but in many ways it was Christmas that kind of drew me in. There was definitely a cultural connection. And then I discovered, of course, the heritage that I have with these Western saints, and that this is what they largely did on Sunday mornings. So there's also that aspect that spoke to me. Dixie Pride. Have you gone to the Western Rite Conference? And if you have, what are your thoughts? So I recently went to the Rorate Western Rite Conference about a month ago. I did not make it to the Antiochian Conference this year, but it was an interesting conference. It was about a week long. I got to receive the sacraments every day. We kept the Divine Office of St. Benedict, daily confessions. All of our meals were typically taken in common. It was a wonderful experience. And I definitely recommend to anybody out there, just for the spiritual gains alone, outside of just the conference lectures, to if you can avail yourself to that, please try it. All right, were the Benedictines from Athos also practicing the same liturgy Western converts do? Yes and no. So the Western liturgy has undergone, in the Gregorian Mass, has undergone very little textual change from the 6th, 7th century. So yes, they were Now, the difference being they did not practice the epiclesis in the Mass like modern Western Rite does, and we don't add the epiclesis in because we believe that the Roman form is inefficient. We believe that it is. We do that out of canonical obedience because that's what our bishops have asked us to do, and that's just kind of how it's stuck. So they basically did the exact same thing that we do, just the only difference being they did not have the epiclesis. Lena says, I am from Eastern Europe, and... oh, it's cut off. And this makes me very happy. Yeah, I'm glad to hear it. Yeah, absolutely. Looks like I finally caught up on a lot of the questions here. That's awesome to see. Thank you guys so much for coming out and supporting the channel and asking a bunch of questions. If anybody has any other questions, for sure, I'd be more than happy to answer. And yeah, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. This is just a basic Q&A. I didn't have a whole lot of plans for this evening, so it may sound a little unprepared and rushed, because it is, but we do have an Instagram under the same name as well. Follow us there. We do some apologetics there. So yeah, I just kind of wanted to test this out because I have more content, more live streams coming up that I have planned, and I just wanted to make sure that everything works on my side before I delve into that. So I figured a Q&A would be a solid way to test it. All right, looks like we have another question from George Karavakas. What was boring about Christmas service in the Eastern Rite? I didn't say it was boring. I don't think any liturgy is boring, of course. Now, it didn't speak to me on the same level, culturally, as the Western Rite Christmas does. And it sounds like you're Greek based on your name. If I'm not, I apologize. But for you, that's your cultural context if you grew up in the Eastern Rite. And that's what you know to be Christmas. Whereas someone in the West may not have that same connection to Christmas. For instance, the hymns that we sing for Christmas in the, I don't want to say secular world because we're not singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer at Mass, but we are singing various other hymns like the Angels We Have Heard on High and other hymns to that effect. So those culturally speak to us in the West on a different level just because we grew up with those. So yeah, it wasn't a boring liturgy by any means. I'm just saying it didn't speak to me on the same way that the Western services spoke to me. And Christmas, that wasn't what sold me entirely about the Western Rite. Like I said, that was just something that kind of made me interested in it. And then from there, it's been a constant progress, a process of growth. And from there, I think the real sticking point is the important work of living the life of the saints of my ancestry, and reading the lives of these saints, and reading what their services were like, and being able to recall and think, well, this is what I do on Sunday. Where St. Ambrose mentions placing a piece of salt on the tongue of the person being received, like, oh, I had that happen to me when I was received. So that's really important to me, is to live the life and ethos of these saints. And I think that that's the most orthodox thing that we can do, is to continue to live in the lives of these saints. How do you folks practice the rosary? That's a pretty interesting question to ask. Rocor Western Rite and Antiochian Western Rite in America have a little bit of a different opinion about this. The Antiochians typically will do the Dominican rosary. The only difference is they do not imagine images in their mind like a Roman Catholic would. Whereas in the Rocor Western Rite tradition, the rosary would typically be done with like 50 Hail Marys separated by the Our Fathers with no meditations at all. Or some in Rocor Western Rite will do the Rule of Saint Seraphim of Sarav, which is just I think it's 150 Hail Marys, if I'm not mistaken. So hopefully that answers the question. Metanoia says, what sources do we have for early Western liturgies and the claim that they underwent little liturgical development? So we have a couple different sources. First of all, we have the Leonine Sacramentary. I believe that's from the 8th or 9th century. Don't quote me on that. It might even be earlier. It's an early document. And many of the collects that we pray, which are one of the movable propers that change every Sunday at the liturgy, are found in that book, as well as a general outline of the Divine Liturgy or the Mass that we do. And very little has changed there. You could also look at the various missals or books of the liturgy from the 900s to the year 1000, such as the Missal of Robert Huminges, and it's word for word the exact same thing that we do. So we have very good authority, very ample testimony that what we are doing on Sunday morning more or less is the exact same thing that most Western churches were doing on the eve of the Great Schism. Doomer Gloomer, nice name there. He says, what positives will outdo the cons if Western Rite is pushed further in the West? Why should it be prioritized? Well, the second half of your question, based on priority, I don't know if I have an answer for that. I have an opinion, but my opinion may not be what I want to publish on this channel. But in terms of positives will outdo the cons if it's pushed further. I think it's going to make it a little bit more accessible, because Western Rite is seeing a very vast growth in missionary parishes and going places where perhaps Eastern Rite parishes might not go just yet, at least. So I think that there's that aspect of it that can offer to the Orthodox community in America. Obviously, positives. We're dunking heads in the water, and we have oil on people's foreheads. We're baptizing and we're chrismating people. That's always the positive situation here, and that's the goal of the church. That's what we're here to do. We're here to save souls, and that's first and foremost. So, I think that no matter what liturgy we employ, the fact of the matter is it's working, and we shouldn't change things if it's working. If it's making people, if it's having people convert, and these people are sticking around and they're bearing fruits, then why cut the tree down? That's what I would say in suggestion to that. Looks like our boy George here responded. He says, my apologies, didn't mean to make it sound like you were bored. I appreciate your answer. Of course, yeah, no, I just wanted to make sure the wording was correct. I didn't want to sound like I was bored at a divine liturgy. I certainly wasn't. I mean, it's the greatest miracle that exists on the face of the earth. So how could one be bored at it? Dixie Pride says, should I go to an Antiochian Western Rite or a Rocor Western Rite? Both are within a reasonable distance, both with good priests. Well, personally, I think that's a question that only you can answer. I would say, if you visited both, talk to the priests there and kind of figure out what parish works for you. I don't want to sound like I'm saying go on a buffet of which parish to pick, but you kind of have that option open to you. It's based on what you would like to do. If anybody wants to link, if you want to put a Discord server link in for the slaves server, go ahead and do that, and people can join if they would like. And I'm open on that server to talk a little bit more privately if you have questions, specifically like this question. But I would say check out both parishes. Which one has the best music? Which one, do you feel more comfortable in? These kind of questions now come into play. Okay, we have another question. Seth says, is heterodoxy a blatant issue in the Western Rite, or is it overemphasized by skeptics of the Western Rite? I'm going to grab a drink real fast. So, heterodoxy. I've seen some pretty interesting things in some Eastern Rite liturgies. Obviously, we have the scandal of ex-priest Joshua Shubing leaving, and he was an Eastern Rite clergyman. So these kind of things happen. Unfortunately, it's the human aspect of the church. If it's more prevalent in the Western Rite, I can't say that it is. I think that, especially in Rocor Western Rite, I personally know more about that because that's my neck of the woods. And I know that the priests, for instance, that's the only diocese, to my knowledge, in the entire Orthodox landscape of America that requires an Orthodox seminary education. Every other diocese typically requires a seminary education, but it doesn't necessarily have to be an Orthodox seminary. So, to my knowledge, Rocor Western Rite Vicariate is the only ones that require an Orthodox theological education. So, I would say it's probably just a bunch of skeptics. You may find one or two clergymen or laity saying some wonky things, but you'll find that in the Eastern Rite as well. Unfortunately, it's not something that we should it's something that we should pray about regardless of the rite. This is something that it's a personal issue rather than a liturgical use issue. So I hope that makes sense. George says, any Western Rite churches I can attend in the U.S., specifically the New York or the New Jersey area. Yeah, if my editor Eusebius is on here still, if you could link up the Rocor Parish locator, Rocor Western Rite Parish locator, and the Antiochian one, that would be really awesome. So George, I would say sit tight, and my editor might be able to link the church locators for you. Doomer Glimmer says, if Western Rite makes things easier for Westerners, why have we seen a massive success with the Eastern Rite in former papist-ruled countries like Guatemala? I'm not saying that it's the only answer. It's not either or. It's not either we do the Western Rite or either we do the Byzantine Rite. I'm saying that why can't we use both? If both yield fruit, why not use both? We're not reductionistic. We don't believe that only one tune of music is sufficient. We glorify God in various melodies and various voices with the most elaborate vestments that we can afford, with glorious temples. Surely a wooden church would suffice, but yet we build massive stone temples to God's glory. And the same goes liturgically as well. So I hope that answers the question. Glory to God for the massive success in countries like Guatemala. I think a lot of it also has to do with the fact that there's no Western Rite presence in Guatemala yet, to my knowledge. So you can't really compare Guatemala to our situation because it's not comparable. There's not a dual rite situation in Guatemala, to my knowledge. Looks like we have another question from Shining Diamond. He says, thoughts on Ordo Romanus Primus? If I can pull that question up. I think that means, I'm not sure what that is. If you could explain what that is, perhaps I'm just having a brain fart here, but if you could explain more what you mean by that, I could probably give you a bit of a better answer. Asafraj says, I've spoken to Hispanics who are part of the Orthodox movements in these areas, and they wish to see the Western Rite in South America as well. That's correct. I've spoken personally, and they deeply desire to move into South America. So perhaps that's something that we could be praying about privately, is to see an explosion of the Western Rite and the Eastern Rite. It doesn't matter.